At 6 o'clock a.m. sharp, the glass doors of the city's tallest skyscraper whispered open, and stepped a man named Thomas Knott, in a tailored suit or shiny shoes, but in worn-out boots, a faded uniform, and a mop slung over his shoulder. He was the first to arrive, always was. To most Thomas was background noise, a shadow in the hallway, the janitor. People glanced past him, earbuds in, eyes down. They didn't see the straight lines on his forearms, etched by years of honest labor. They didn't see the quiet strength in his tired eyes, a testament to battles fought and won. On a good day, they might offer a polite nod. On a bad day, they wouldn't even look up from their phones. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Thomas had already won at life, and he didn't need to prove it to anyone. Why is that old guy still working here? They chuckled to themselves. Must have messed up big time in life. But what they didn't know was that Thomas had already won at life, and he didn't need to prove it to anyone. He swept the floors with pride, cleaned the restrooms with care, polished the brass handrails till they gleamed. When the building was quiet, he often paused, just to admire it. Not because he had to work there, but because it was his building, his legacy. It hadn't been handed to him on a silver platter. Oh no. He'd clawed his way up from the dirt, brick by brick, dream by dream. Thomas had worked in that building for over 30 years, and yet to most he was still just the janitor. The young ones assumed he was stuck. The older ones assumed he had no choice. No one ever asked. No one ever cared. It was easier to label than to listen. And so Thomas kept sweeping, kept cleaning, content in his routine, finding solace in the rhythm of his work. For him, the joy wasn't in the paycheck, but in the purpose, in the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, in the subtle order he brought to a world that seemed determined to spin out of control. Thomas wasn't interested in titles or applause. He was interested in staying grounded, in remembering where he came from, and in silently watching how people treated those they thought were beneath them. Because in their casual jabs and thoughtless remarks, he saw a reflection of humanity's flaws. Decades earlier, Thomas was a young man with calloused hands and a dream. His father had taught him the value of hard work. His mother, the importance of dignity. He fixed leaking pipes, scrubbed stubborn stains, and saved every extra dollar. He didn't go out, didn't take fancy vacations, but he invested, bought a rundown apartment on the edge of town. People laughed then, too. Why would you buy that dump? They said. But he fixed it up, rented it out, then bought another, then another. Real estate became his quiet empire, brick by brick, deal by deal. By the time he was 50, Thomas owned multiple buildings, this tower included. But he never stopped working, never stopped showing up at dawn. Because for him, it wasn't about wealth. It was about purpose. He had once been young and hungry, starting at the bottom and climbing his way up. Now, he saw himself in the interns rushing through the lobby, in the new hires struggling with their first assignments. While others saw a lowly janitor, Thomas saw potential. He saw stories waiting to be written, and he kept working, not out of need, but out of a deep-seated sense of duty and principle. For Thomas, the office wasn't just a place of work, it was a microcosm of society, a place where he could observe human nature up close, where he could witness the rise and fall of careers, the ebb and flow of ambition. The truth was, he loved his job. He found a strange sort of satisfaction in the mundane tasks, in the routine of it all. He knew that for most people, the idea of spending one's golden years cleaning toilets would be unthinkable. But for him, it was more than just a job, it was a philosophy. It was a quiet rebellion against a world that often values appearances over substance, a world that so easily forgets the dignity in dirt and the honor in hard work. He kept a small office on the top floor, nothing extravagant, just a quiet space with a view of the city he'd helped build. From there, he handled tenant leases, responded to complaints, and yes, scheduled his own janitorial shifts. Some tenants tried to sweet-talk him into fixing things faster. Others tried to intimidate him into giving in to their demands. But Thomas stood his ground. He didn't need the extra tip money. He wasn't afraid of losing his job. He did his work because it needed to be done. Because for him, helping others wasn't a transaction. It was a calling. It wasn't pride that made him keep cleaning. It was principle. Thomas believed that the moment you think you're too important to do basic work, you've lost touch with real success. He knew that, in their eyes, he was just a janitor, and in a way, he liked it that way. It gave him the freedom to observe, to listen, to learn. And oh, how much he learned about human nature in that grand hall of mirrors they called the office. He watched ambitious young men turn into jaded middle managers and then into bitter old men clinging to power. He watched talented women get passed over for promotions, then leave, only to return years later, wiser and more successful than their male counterparts. He saw colleagues become friends, enemies, lovers, and then enemies again. And through it all, he kept cleaning. He saw kindness, cruelty, generosity, selfishness. He saw the best and worst of humanity, and he kept cleaning, because that's what he did. That's what he was good at. So the years rolled by like the tides, and Thomas kept working. He became a fixture in the building, a silent observer of the human comedy. Then one Monday morning, a memo went out. A new building owner would be introduced during the company-wide meeting. Everyone buzzed with speculation. Some thought it was a millionaire investor or a powerful CEO. As the staff gathered in the sleek boardroom, the doors opened. In walked Thomas, mop in hand. Silence. Then murmurs. Then shook. Wait him. Someone whispered. Eyes widened. Jaws dropped. The man they never noticed was now the man they answered to. Thomas set down his mop, looked around the room and smiled. Good morning, he said simply. No gloating. No speech. Just a quiet nod that spoke volumes. That moment changed everything. People started greeting the janitors, holding the elevator for them, saying thank you. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Because now they understood. Dignity doesn't wear a uniform. Character isn't measured by a title. Thomas's story spread like wildfire, not because he was rich, but because he reminded everyone of something we too often forget. The true measure of a person lies in how they treat others when there is nothing to gain. He continued working, long after people knew who he was. Because, for Thomas, being kind wasn't a strategy, it was who he was. In a world obsessed with appearances and status, let us not forget that humility is the real luxury, and that greatness often hides in plain sight, sometimes behind a mop, sometimes behind silence. Never judge someone by their job or their clothes. Judge by their heart, their actions, their respect for others. Would you have treated Thomas any differently if you knew who he was? Let us know in the comments. And if this story made you think, hit like, share it, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the real side of life.